Daly from Winnipeg, or from Kenora, actually. So welcome to another workshop, and apologies for taking up two of your two chunks of time early in January. I know it's a really busy time, so thank you for being here. We'll jump right into the workshop that, unfortunately, due to the gremlins of technology, even yesterday, Sean, I think as he went to share his screen, said, oh, it's asking me to update something, right? Never fails that your computer wants to update something right when you're about to present. So sorry about that, and welcome back, and Happy New Year to everybody. I'm delighted to be back again to hear from Yogi at Eco Canada about how the big frame and the bucket for infusing sustainability within the trades, or greening the trades, the construction trades. I'm going to ask Sandra, as usual, to offer a land acknowledgement and invite you all to pop into the chat where you're calling from. I think it's a great practice, and I know I always scroll through to starting to learn the names of our Indigenous communities across the Canada. I'm starting to recognize some of them as well, which is great. So Sandra, please go ahead.
Thanks. CICAN acknowledges that our offices located in Ottawa are on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. CICAN recognizes the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. Further, CICAN respects and affirms the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. CICAN has and will continue to honor the commitments to self-determination and sovereignty we have made to Indigenous nations and peoples. CICAN acknowledges the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and fervently believes that education contributes to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share together. Thank you. Now let's hand it over to Yogi.
Thank you, Sandra. So welcome, everyone. This is Yogi from Eco Canada. And so thank you for giving me the second opportunity, because I know we wanted to do this session just before Christmas. And in fact, my last slide also had a Merry Christmas slide. So at least I was able to send you the slides before the Christmas. So I prepared this presentation. It's a bit longer than I wanted to. And again, I will not try to rush and complete the whole session today. So if need be, I will request you to set up a separate time again, and we resume where we leave today. Because the idea is to provide as much supporting material, as much guidance, and as much examples that we can share today. And also throughout the slides, if we are able to do some discussions to generate more ideas. And I have requested a couple of my other colleagues to join as well today. So my colleagues from our training department, some colleagues from the accreditation team, so they are here as well. I thought that this will be a good opportunity for my other team members to see who are the colleges who are already participating in this program. And through our accreditation program, we work with many colleges and universities. So if there are any opportunities for us to share good practices or connect the current colleagues with their other departments who are working with us, we will be very happy to see that opportunity as well. So while I'm trying to share my screen here, if I can quickly request my colleagues from ECO to just introduce themselves. Can you see my slide now?
I can see your slide.
And perfect. It's working.
My name is Harvey Taphorn. I'm with ECO's training department, and I work with Yogi.
Hi, my name is Devak Maharaj. I'm with the professional services department, and I work with Yogi. And for some reason, my camera is not working, so forgive me.
Great. Thanks, Devan. Thanks, Harvey.
Hello, everyone. Oh, yeah. Sorry. My name is Wura Ladekwaja. I'm also with the professional services team and work with accreditation. I'm also in the same boat as Devan, so excuse my camera.
Great. So we went through the last two sessions where the focus was how to indigenize the content. So how do we bring in those indigenous perspectives in the various programs or the trades related courses that we're going to develop. So as a part of this project, EcoCanada's role is to guide, support, and provide resources to our colleges to help customize the program to bring in the elements of climate change. Now, this course does not intend to make the tradespeople become climate change expert or get all those technical knowledges, but the idea is to provide the resources and bring that climate change perspective in the jobs which they do. And so that will be the focus for today's presentation. And of course, please stop me anytime whenever you have any questions. You can wait till the end or keep sending your questions in between. In case I miss those questions, Judy, please stop me in between and ask those questions so that we don't miss out on them. A quick slide about EcoCanada, who we are. So I'm pretty sure many of us are aware of EcoCanada, and you may have a chance in the past to use some of our resources. So we were established in early 90s, and our mandate and vision is to grow Canada's environmental or green jobs sector. So all our programs are designed to support that objective. We work with the academic programs to provide resources and help the programs to bring in knowledge and information about what's changing, what's happening in the labor market. We also develop resources to support the students. So in essence, we champion end-to-end career of an environment professional, whether we will be working with the academic programs, or we will be certifying environment professionals either as EPT, environment professional in training, or the full environmental professional designation. And also through various other programs, we also provide opportunities to the students or the young professionals or the experienced professionals to capitalize on the opportunities and resources in this sector. Our research is widely used by industry, government, and environment professionals. So we do labor market research. We do provide labor market outlook. So if you hadn't had a chance to go through our website, please go there, and under the research section, you can find the research reports. And one of the recent research reports talks about the labor market outlook. So how many jobs are we expecting in the green jobs sector over the next 5 to 10 years? And I can quickly share the numbers. Like, we are expecting over 270,000 jobs in the environmental sector over the next 3 to 4 years. We also provide the outlook in terms of the province-wise, like which are the provinces or how many jobs could be there in which cities, or and then what kind of skills are required, what kind of specific jobs will be there. So all of those information are there, and many of the programs, they continuously use those resources to help their students learn about those opportunities. So please go through those, and if you have any difficulty, let me know and I can help you download those reports. They're all freely available resources. And we also have a wage funding program. Many of the colleges are aware of it. If you're not aware, please do let us know. We can send our team to provide information and present to your students. And the students can get up to 50 to 75% of their first year's wages covered through those wage funding programs. So there are tons of resources which I would suggest, which is a bit outside the scope of this project, but of course they're free resources, and please don't hesitate in using them. Now, in terms of my background, so I have been with ECO for close to 7.5 years. My qualification and experience has been in environmental sector. I did my master's, PhD, and postdoctoral research in climate change. I did my MBA from U of A, and I have also been working in the ESG sector for last 17 years. In terms of the kind of projects I have worked on, they include, say, impact assessment. It could be the ESG rating, environmental auditing. And so I had an opportunity to work in close to 25 plus countries. And in terms of training experience, I have delivered over 300 training courses in more than 15 countries. And those training courses have ranged from environment, specific technical topics related to environment or impact assessment or ESG or sustainability or human rights. So I bring some of those perspective, and I've been involved with many courses and curriculum developments. So that knowledge and that experience probably I think could be very useful for me to provide some insights or when we work with you to share our feedback on the curriculums or the courses you are developing. So the purpose of today's session, as I said, it is to share ideas and suggestions on the topics that may be included in the course design. So we are basically suggesting what are some of those topics that could be very relevant. Now you may decide whether those topics are relevant and how they fit into the courses or the programs that you're developing. It's entirely up to you depending on the focus of those courses and how you see these topics relevant in creating the awareness on those trades professionals. Now, this course, this session is not designed to impart knowledge about the topics we are suggesting in the course. Of course, we'll be going through what those topics are, what those general content could be around those topics. And I'm very much available to share more insights on those topics if you wish to. So please feel free to reach out if you want us to support you with any specific technical topics, or if you want us to review any of the materials that you're developing. Now, and how you use those material is again up to you, whether you want to say, right now, I don't know the structure of the courses that you're planning to develop. I don't know the duration of those courses or duration of those programs. So one of my suggestions would be if there is a possibility to sprinkle these topics throughout the program rather than putting everything together in one course and making sure that the students complete this course and they move on. I think you can decide what's the best way to do it. But if I'm developing a course, I would rather see if they are sprinkled throughout the courses so that the students are always current updated and they don't see it as an environmental section is an add-on which they have to do and they have to pass. Because the way we are trying to build the new generation of workforces, that the environmental factors are built in. It's not a one-off job. Something similar to safety, like you don't see safety as one topic. You see safety as, okay, it's an integral part of my job. So we are hoping to integrate that kind of culture in all the programs and all the courses where we are teaching students to consider climate change or environmental best practices into the courses. Now, objectives for today, we will be talking about climate change and sustainable development basics that could be integrated into the course. So value of sustainable practices in construction trades. We'll talk about how SDGs could be integrated. What are some of those topics from those SDGs, or which are specific SDGs which could relate to the construction related trades. We will briefly also cover what kind of topics could be covered into climate change and trade. So how those synergies could be brought in. How the courses can consider codes and regulations, because many codes could be very much specific to building and constructions, and many of those codes and regulations may also intersect with climate change perspectives. So it will be good to talk about some of those and how they can be integrated throughout the courses so that the students are able to gain those insights. The opportunities to mitigate climate risks, and towards the end, we'll also talk about some of the best practices which could be adopted in the sustainable trades. One thing which we are also suggesting, like throughout these topics, we'll stop in between and we'll talk about what kind of activities and exercises could be designed so that the students can gain more insights and practical hands-on experience on these topics. All right, so, and this is something which could be a very basic introductory session in the courses. So when you are talking about the basics and introduction of the program, we can infuse some of those topics which are very much basic to the sustainable development related subject. Now, in this case, we recommend you can consider, say, talk about what are some of those concepts like greenhouse gas emissions, what is climate change, what are the impacts, what are the SDGs, what are some of those global movements and global guidelines, or how they work. Say, for example, if we are a signatory to some of those international guidelines, how the government of Canada will bring in certain legislations to meet our obligations, so that the students are able to learn and understand that why are we talking about those topics and how these topics relate with the global phenomena or how these topics can relate with, say, some of those expectations which we see at the global level. One thing which we are also seeing a lot, that now many of our sectors and Canadian businesses, they are focusing on business abroad. So now we are gaining a lot of momentum in exporting our knowledge and technologies and expertise. We are seeing a lot of workers going out there, not only working in Canada, they are also working abroad in different countries. And I work in different places, different countries, and very often I will see like our Canadian professionals are working in Southeast Asia, they are working in the Caribbean, they are working in other countries. So from that perspective, it will be a great idea to talk about those global perspectives, global guidelines, and some of those key topics which are very much in everybody's mind. Talk about some key agreements like COP27, what it is, how it works, how the obligations that we as a government make there, how they are reflected in the policies and the regulations back home. Because buildings and construction is one of the largest emitters globally for the GHGs or CO2 emissions. And then you can also talk about how the buildings factor in, as I said. And if you really look at the total emissions, like United Nations report, it talks about more than 35% of the energy consumption globally is going to the energy building and construction sector. The recent United Nations report says over 38% of the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions are coming from buildings and construction activities. So we are like responsible for over more than 1/3 of the total emissions. So talk to the students, like these are some of those issues why building sector is so much important to meet our obligations, why building sector is so much important for us to be the front runners in incorporating those sustainable practices. And again, sometimes the students will say, okay, well, what if the building is contributing 38%, but our job is only related to the construction activities? So out of that 38%, over 10% is contributed by the construction related activities itself. So construction phase itself is accounting for more than 10% of CO2 emissions globally from the building sector itself. So sharing some of these examples in the courses, and I would also suggest provide some other links and resources which the students can go and try and get more insights and more information on those topics. So if we consider using this as a module for talking about sustainability and basics in the construction phase, so some of those objectives of those modules could be the students should be able to learn some of the key environmental terms and definitions. So what is environment? What is pollution? What is emission? What is building envelope? What is energy consumption? What is the effluents we are talking about? So some of those, it would be very important for the students. And let's not assume that these are the very basic generic topics which everybody would be knowing by themselves, because our experience is students come from different backgrounds. So many of them might not have heard of those terms. And it becomes also very important for us to consider. There are students coming from, say, immigrant students, so they might not have worked in those settings in their basic elementary education. They might not have learned about those topics. So it will be good to have some of those very basic content in the beginning itself to make sure that there is a common baseline for all students and they understand those terms. Talk about some of those the agreements and protocols. So even things like which are obsolete now, like we don't talk about Kyoto Protocol, which existed long ago, but we still talk about those Kyoto Protocol principles. We talk about the GHG emissions. We talk about the GHG reductions. We talk about the carbon credits. We still talk about those carbon trading. So it's important to talk about the history, the protocols and the regulations, things like, say, Montreal Protocol, which would be very much relevant for the ozone depleting substances. And then how trades in the construction activity can relate with the climate change. So some high level examples at this stage would be very important in setting the foundation so that when the students reach to the next courses or next topics, they would be able to relate how these topics can be integrated or impacted by their activities. So here are a suggestion of a few points, few topics that you may consider. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a list to provoke some ideas and thoughts and maybe point you in the direction what some of the topics could consider here. And
Yogi, may I jump in with a question? Sorry to interrupt you. Just two things I wanted to clarify. One is, will we be able to share this PowerPoint deck with everybody afterwards? Or have you already shared it?
Yeah, we already shared. The PDF was shared when last time. Yeah.
Okay, and PDF is fine because I think a lot of the terminology here is going to be really useful. But also in a little bit earlier, you mentioned about sharing some links maybe with the instructors who will be using these modules. Will EcoCanada support finding some of those resources? Will you be able to share? You'll be able to share some of that with the folks, eh?
Yes, please. Yeah. So what I would recommend, if all the participants, they don't have my direct email ID, I think it should be there in the invitation.
Yeah.
So please feel free to write to me anytime, and we will be very happy to provide the existing resources that we have already compiled. And when, as a part of our role in this project, we are also developing a small handbook, which or a guidebook or a toolkit that the programs can use. So those will be there in that document as well. And as I said, it's impossible to identify and list all of those resources. Like there are so much tons of resources available. So we will provide a good compilation of some very good resources from various sources. And then based on those, probably that will provide enough guidance to the programs if they want to dig deeper and find more information. And they can also validate with us, say, for example, once they find a resource and they want us to quickly validate, like whether the facts, information and are good or credible, we can certainly do that. Yeah. Great. So I just put together a list of some topics that you can consider in the basic module. So climate change, Conference of Parties, which is COP27, COP26. So in fact, I've been following it since COP8. So COP8 and then after that, so I have no information or background. Probably I was too young before that or too naive. But since COP8, I had been following it every year. And so we have a lot of resources and information that I can share. So Conference of Parties, energy efficiency, Energy Star rating. So like these are certain things which I'm pretty sure many participants would be aware and they would have seen it, but they might not be aware of what's the idea behind those ratings, how those ratings are done. And so when you are going for those ratings, what they really mean from the consumer's perspective. So knowledge on those things will be very helpful, because what we are trying to achieve here is that when our students go as a trade person, they are able to answer the questions, or they are able to come out with suggestions and guidance in their job. They are able to educate other workers and other professionals in establishing some good practices. So things like greenhouse gas emissions, net zero, ozone depleting substances, which is very much relevant for, say, professionals related to HVAC activities. Or even ozone depleting substances could be very relevant for horticulture activities, because there are many chemicals which have been banned under ODS protocol, and some of them are still in use. And then things like what is renewable energy? When we talk about resilience, what exactly does it mean? What's the role of a tradesperson in bringing the resilience factors into their activities? So, and again, this topic can go as long as you want. So we can choose depending on the which program we want to integrate it with, and then feel free to reach out to me for quickly if you need any validation. Now, in the next couple of slides, I'm also briefly touching on, so for those basic topics, what else you can consider, say, talk about climate change. It's a global phenomenon, and that's why we are very much concerned in Canada with our emissions, even though our reductions here may not directly benefit only us. So talk about what causes climate change, what are the concerns, how it is impacting the world. If you want to pick up examples from say some of those climate disasters. But one thing I would always recommend is sometimes we have seen people going overboard in the sense like information overload, or too many examples that could be. So it's very important to be careful that we are integrating the content from the environmental professional perspective, not environmental activism perspective. So as the professionals, we are looking for practices that will provide a solution. So we all know cutting like deforestation is bad. We don't want to cut trees, but that's a requirement. If we are talking about a building construction in Canada, we need timber. So how do we do that sustainably rather than saying, OK, we don't want to cut any trees? In fact, it was very interesting. Yesterday, I came across a news that European Union is considering banning all products that are tied up with deforestation. So and that's a very interesting way. And now it seems like a simple regulation, but it will have very large implications. I'm pretty sure that may affect even the medicine or those fields. It can also affect. So, but the issue here is European Union, once they bring a regulation, it gradually gets adopted by rest of the world. So that is a very good sign for us that, OK, that still gives us 5 years or 10 years of lead time to start thinking and start preparing ourselves. If some of you might be aware of ROHS legislation, which they brought almost, I think, 15, 20 years ago, which was restriction of hazardous substances. So any electronic product, if they have a heavy metal or something, they specified maximum how much quantity can be there. So in those days, I saw ships and ships of consignments of picture tubes, TVs. They were sent back to their host countries because they said they do not comply with ROHS legislation. They brought ELV notification. So this is something which I would very closely watch because this will have a lot of impact on our construction sector as well. So talk about some of those issues. And rather than being a prescriptive module here, rather I would suggest, like, instead of being too prescriptive, like these are the topics you should know, rather I would provide an awareness, like this is how you should be thinking. And this is how you should be looking for resources. This is how these could be integrated. So that could be a different way to prepare the students to be always on lookout, like what to look for, what the changes and how those changes can impact our business and how we can prepare to be ready to meet those regulations, meet those requirements. And in these days, a lot of times they're not only driven by the regulations, they're also driven by the consumer demands and consumer practices. Right. So it's important for the students to be aware of what's happening around and then how to adapt those things in their day-to-day businesses. And then quickly, I will also link those topics with the construction and various trades. So how are or what are the impacts of the construction activities on natural resources? What activities and what type of natural resources can be impacted? What activities could be there? So some of those common examples can relate. OK, we are talking about the timber. We are talking about, say, the soil erosion, or we are talking about, say, if you're doing any construction activities in reserve areas, or we are doing any construction activity in sensitive areas. So this is how they may impact us. Talk about the biodiversity. Share how different traits can impact the plants and animals. It could be also very relevant to, say, traits like horticulture. It could be very relevant because you will be talking about, say, invasive species. You will be talking about some of those chemicals that can be used. We can also talk about, now another concept which is now being very popular in this sector is the use of nanofertilizers. So I will talk about some of those things in the course, in the module itself, so that the students know these are the causes, these are the impacts, and these are the solutions which can be considered. We'll talk about the pollution. We'll talk about the material. What are the different materials which are used? How the materials are transported and how better efficiencies could be achieved. And then if you want to integrate even topics like local sourcing instead of relying heavily on imported items or bulk purchasing. So those are certain things which the students can also consider when they start working or going to do their jobs in the respective trades. All right, so I will take a quick pause here. How are we doing with time? 30 minutes. So, OK, so I just want to open it for discussions, maybe 2 or 3 quick points. What do you think about this? Yes, please.
I recently read about the success of the Montreal Protocol as it relates to ozone depletion substances, and it's one of the first examples of a global effort to control an impact on our global environment. They're predicting restoration of the ozone layer within relatively short amount of time. And the reason I mention it is I think it would be important to include whatever examples of success we might have to motivate and show that it's a problem with solutions.
Very true, very true. And then I think I'm glad you brought up this point, because if you look at the ODS list under the Montreal Protocol, it has a list of so many substances, and some of the substances are phased out, some of the substances are banned for use, some of them are still allowed for restricted use. And unfortunately, North America is one of the most those culprits, where we have been using certain chemicals for mostly the leisure purposes. For example, methyl bromide. I don't know the status right now, but for many, many years, methyl bromide was allowed for using using the turf grass as a fumigant. And the US was one of the ones who would always protest, that never wanted to get this chemical fully banned. So it's good for us to talk about these, and we can share these examples as additional resources for the students so that they can go, okay, these are the chemicals we are not supposed to use. These are the chemicals which are allowed for restricted uses. So I'm glad. Yeah, thank you very much for bringing it. So what do you think about some of the topics we discussed now as an introductory module? And what are some of those group activities you think could be considered, or how the students could be assessed or evaluated? Any suggestions, feedback? We have a shy group.
Can you repeat that question, Yogi?
Yeah. So I just wanted a quick feedback or suggestions on this introductory, the topics that we covered for introductory modules. And what do you think could be some of those activities that we can insert into this module for students who can use them for more learning or getting more insight on the topic?
I imagine a lesson where the students are instructed to discover and share where some of the resources come from, so that we have a better awareness of the source that we're drawing from when we choose to build new rather than repair. Or in my trade, copper is a big component because I do refrigeration and HVAC work. And I was in near Kamloops about 2 years ago near Logan Lake, and I toured one of the largest open pit copper mines in the world, and it was absolutely horrifying. Yeah. And when we go to work every day, our answer to everything is just replace it, and without awareness of where copper comes from. And that's Canadian copper. That doesn't count copper that's imported from places with lower mining and extraction regulations. So I think the copper is just one example, but if we contemplate the resources we draw on and their sources, that might be an exercise that could be done in an hour or two.
Great. No, that's an excellent suggestion, and I think this will be a great stage where we can talk to the students about the overall life cycle of a material, how we can, if we are able to prolong the life, because a lot of times people think recycling is a very good alternative. But if you look at the whole life cycle, sometimes recycling is more carbon intensive than generating a fresh material from the virgin resources. So we need to bring out some of these concepts very early on, and that's a great suggestion. So what I suggested activities, and again, as I said, these are just a very indicative example, and perhaps based on your experience and expertise, you can add more activities here. So reflection, fact check, and then the group activities where we divide the students in various groups, and we ask them to do a research project on impact of construction and building activities on environment and climate change, or even some activities where they can talk about how some of those materials lifespan could be enhanced, how some of those impacts could be mitigated. And this activity will basically, I think, could be a good point that can set some baseline, as well as start doing that environmental thinking in the students. Because many a times when the students come, they focus on the technical topics and the technical skills which are relevant to their career goals. So in this case, if a student is coming as an electrician trade or electrical trade, they might not be very much concerned, or they might not think about the environmental impacts of their trade or their activities. So once we are able to introduce some of these concepts, that might help student in giving it a different thought, and then perhaps incorporating some of those practices. Yes, please. I see a hand here.
Hi there, sorry, I can't be super involved as I'm in class teaching right now, but I did have a quick question involving supply chain. A lot of our products are dependent on external countries and how they supply our products to us. So I'm just wondering what we're doing as a nation to try to correct the issues that might be provided in our supply chain.
That's very important point, and that's something we have covered in the subsequent modules. So that will be appearing later on, where we are talking about the supply chain, or not only supply chain, we're talking about the whole value chain. So from procurement process to the use and disposal, and or maybe the alternate uses. So that's something we have covered in further module. So probably that will be a more advanced version, because many of our tradespeople, like when they graduate or when they move on up in their career, they will be involved in, say, as a project manager, or they will be involved as a procurement manager, or they will, so when in those senior roles, they will have a better opportunity to integrate these climate change practices in the overall business, which they will be seeing. So excellent point. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. Judy.
Yeah, when Matthew was sharing his example of the visit to the copper mine, it reminded me of the power of a personal story as well, as a teaching technique. It just right away. I have never been to see a copper mine. I don't know if I've ever seen an image. I know I've seen some images of, like, more like with the tar sands kinds of images, but I can, and only on my screen, I can only imagine the impact of seeing something in person and hearing your instructor talk about an experience they had of going and seeing something. And it made me think about, again, I don't know what's feasible, but it could be even in a list of proposed activities, maybe something that wouldn't be included in your modules, because your modules are for your fellow instructors, right? You're creating professional development material that other instructors could use. So you could be proposing a list of activities to an instructor that could include something like, I mean, not everybody lives close enough to a copper mine to go see it, so I take that point, but I think we all live in places where we could probably go see certain things ourselves. I know that in another group of CICAN folks, they talked about the difference it made in their recycling rates at their college when they actually took a group of students to actually see the recycling facility and to actually show them, here's the problem when you put the wrong thing into the wrong bin, because people don't understand, why do you have 5 or 6 places, and they just throw it wherever. But when they took people to actually their on-campus recycling sorting place, suddenly they're all like, oh my God, I'll never do that again, right? So there is I think that hands-on experiential thing that we all know as colleges works really well, I think could be applicable here too. Give them a lived experience of a copper mine or a landfill site, or go to a construction site and see all that they throw away, and then have them imagine, where's this all going? And what could we do instead of throwing it away? I think so. Both stories and direct experience, I think, are really important ways, rather than only the facts, like a combination.
Yeah. And we have we have access to a lot of similar resources that could be used by the instructors, or that can be used by the colleges when they are establishing or developing these programs. So please feel free to reach out if you think we can help you out with something. Just reach out to me, send me an email, and we can either provide you those resources or point you in the right direction from where you can get them. Great. All right, so students assessment, again, this is just a suggestion you can consider, and I'm not sure whether you intend to do the assessment at the end of each module or at the end of each courses, but like this is something which will be appearing at the end of each module. So some continuous assessment of the students based on knowledge, skills, reflection exercises, or any group activities that could be done. So I'm sure when you design these courses, probably there will be a lot of group activities, projects, and maybe smaller projects focused on trade specific activities. So if you are able to integrate some of those environmental aspects in those activities as well, that will be one of the best ways to infuse that environmental thinking in the overall jobs they do. Oh, that's a fantastic example, asking to do those carbon footprinting. And in fact, there are a number of freely available resources that students can use. I recently downloaded a GHG estimation tool from US EPA, which we are planning to use for one of our other projects where we are helping Calgary-based businesses in minimizing their CO2 emissions and introducing climate change considerations in their supply chain. So there are lots of freely available resources that you can use, that you can teach your students. And if you need our help on those, we can definitely provide you information on those resources as well. All right, so the second module, which I thought could be introduced, is the value of sustainable practices. So we start with what it is and why it is important, and then we move on to the value, like what's the value addition we see. So when we talk about the value, we really want to focus here that it is not something you are doing because it's a legislation or it is something which you should be doing, rather how it adds value to the trade, how it adds value to the end user, and how it's adding or how those sustainable practices are going to help the overall construction industry. Because right now, as we are seeing, most of the legislation or emission targets are targeting, say, oil and gas emissions. So these days we only talk about, oh, Alberta has to do this. Alberta, we are putting a cap and trade. But as you see, probably the transportation and building sector is the next in line in terms of total GHG emissions. So we are pretty sure very soon the regulators will start looking at the building sector as well, and they will start talking about some of those legally mandated requirements. And this is something which we are seeing in many other jurisdictions, like outside of Canada as well. I know a number of countries where I worked, where they have made it very clear that any new building cannot be approved until they have a rooftop water harvesting system designed with the building, so that they collect the rainwater during the rainy season and they use that water for various other purposes. So they have already brought those legislation. I've already seen various countries where they have brought the legislation in terms of use of recycled material. They've also talked about, say, the building efficiency pieces. So right now we're talking about value. It's very possible soon these will become a mandated or legislated requirement. So it will be good to build in some of those concepts. So students can focus on what do we mean by sustainability in trades, what are the challenges and opportunities, and what are the benefits of sustainable practices at work. So how they can benefit, and then we can talk about how they will be meeting the legal requirements, how they can mitigate some of those, cost considerations or the overall life cycle of the building or building operations. Now, it's also important in Canada, based on the government estimates, there are over 16 million dwellings and over close to 500,000 commercial and public buildings in Canada. And many of them, they require retrofitting. Many of them, so the new ones which are coming, they already have to follow certain regulations. So some of those learning and enabling objectives under this module could talk about the students should be able to describe sustainable practices within different trades. They should be able to describe the benefits of sustainable practices. why a trade person, as a trade person, they should think about sustainability and be aware of some of those challenges and opportunities. And in terms of challenges, yes, there are many, because many a times things could be more expensive when you're looking at environmentally sourced material or maybe more efficient material. Sometimes the cost is higher compared to business as usual material. So they should be able to understand what are the challenges, how those long-term benefits could be evaluated, how some of those decisions they take now can benefit in the long run, either to them or to the users. Focus on sustainable practices, like the practices which are environmentally sound. They protect the environment, they mitigate the overall long-term impacts. So the module can talk about, okay, yeah. So the module can also talk about the material sourcing. So maybe as a tradesperson, you are not directly responsible for sourcing, but it's quite possible when you move up, you are working as a procurement manager, or you're working as a project manager. You may consider thinking of, can we source local material? Because that directly will be mitigating certain impacts related to the transportation that could be related to some other emissions that in the entire life cycle. Think about the effective techniques that could be used. For example, geothermal heat pumps. How many of us? Yes, please. Did you want to say something, Matthew?
Sorry, I'm a big fan of geothermal heat pumps. That's all.
No, that's something which really is, I see a great example of sustainable practices. And then some of you might be aware of or might be using that DVAP technology in those air conditioning and applications. So it's important. And again, like these technologies, they keep on evolving. So rather than being prescriptive and teaching the students like, OK, go for this, talk about the principles based on what principles they are more effective. And as a student or as a tradesperson, what they should be looking for when they are in their professional life or when they are doing their jobs. And then how some of these can reduce the carbon footprint in their entire life cycle. And sometimes like some of these material, they come with the label, like how much emission controls are achieved because of these new, or sometimes if the students are able to just link it with how much it is going to reduce my energy consumption, how much it is going to increase the overall life of the material which I'm going to use. And that will benefit in the long run, either in terms of the cost, labor cost, material cost, or the overall less carbon emissions, because we are not replacing the product again and again. Talk about the material substitution, what alternative material could be used. So the paints and the lightings, like some of those obvious examples which anybody can think of. But again, the goal here would be to impart that knowledge to the students that, OK, you have to constantly look for the high impacting material. You have to constantly look for the technology which can be obsolete right now or maybe in near future, and that would require a replacement. So any of those alternative choices, even things like the use of alternate chemicals, as we discussed as an example for the ODS depleting substances. So those could be something which the students can learn about. Another topic they can focus on various codes and legislation. So I know, so there are various industry associations, they have their good practices, guidelines. Then there are some of those practices or certifications like LEED certification. And then like something similar to LEED, many countries have adopted and come out with their own standards. So talk to the students about some of those standards which are relevant to building and construction sector. And then student can go into those standards and see that if I want to get my building certified, what are some of those requirements these standards are looking for? And many of those standards, they are focused on the material use. They are focused on the energy consumption. They are focused on the overall life cycle. They are focused on the nature-based solutions. So it will be a good place to talk to the students about these and focus on what are some of those voluntary practices that could be adopted by the professionals in their day-to-day life, or what could be the regulatory requirements which they should keep an eye for. And something which can change in the near future. So what could be other sources of information they can look for? All right, and some examples like how sustainable practices, how they are helping. So things like design methods, use of latest technologies, the material life cycle, and of course, education and training is one of the biggest, I would say, that helps us achieve the objectives much more faster. Like the climate literacy would be a good way to create that awareness. The information about the good practices, information about the good material, information about the decision-making process from the climate change perspective. So those are some of those topics that could be integrated here. In terms of benefits, the students should also learn how it is helping us, say, in reducing the cost, either by prolonging the life, either by reducing the labor cost, either by minimizing the energy consumption or cutting down on those CO2 emissions. Even in those early days during when Kyoto Protocol was there, I am aware of a number of projects, like building projects, who were able to modify their operations after retrofits and all. They were able to achieve carbon credits, which they were selling. And at that time, it was, I think, $17 per ton of CO2 they were able to achieve. So many of those buildings, they were able to even recover their cost in 2 years' time just by carbon trading. So now, I don't think those incentives are still there because Kyoto Protocol doesn't exist, and the current regulations, if they will consider any carbon credits from building operations. And that's something, again, our instructors can do more research and see if some of those practices could be shared. Talk about the social perspective, that how it helps us achieve our social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, or say ESG practices, how it is going to help us reduce the carbon footprint, low energy equipment, renewable sources, eco-friendly material and equipment, talk about the energy efficiency, waste reduction. So some of these, again, will be a generic topic, but more tailored towards the building and construction trades, that how they can help a building worker or construction worker minimize their emissions. And even in certain cases, how some of those quantifications can be done by carbon accounting in their whole life cycle. Right, so why should a trade person do this? So these are some of those examples that we can share, like it showcases you or it brands you as a responsible professional. You get an opportunity to educate your clients of benefits of sustainable options economically and as well as the codes and regulations perspective. This also helps us identify ways to safely reuse, dispose, or conserve the material. Sustainable technology by staying ahead of the curve. Towards the end, I will share some examples of good practices, what some of the businesses are doing. And I know in Alberta, there are a number of construction companies who have started integrating, say, solar panels in their building design itself. So as when you buy a new house from them, your house already comes equipped with a solar panel. And I know there are some of those local constructors, construction companies, they've also highlighting some of their environmentally sustainable practices as in their business promotional material. So as a consumer, as I said, like most of the time, the consumers are the one who are dictating these demands or dictating the changes in the market. So some of these practices, if our tradespeople are able to adopt, if the construction industry is able to use them, then it will be a very good example of how our students can stay ahead of the curve, and they are already prepared when certain things are incorporated into a building code or into a regulation, which could impact the whole industry or whole sector itself. So we can also talk about the challenges and opportunities, because again, as the sector is evolving, some of the things might appear expensive. For example, if you want to go and buy a smart, say, thermostat, that will be probably costing you a little bit more compared to a conventional one. So sometimes as a tradesperson or as a construction person, if you have a pressure of, okay, I have to stay within my budget, or I have to complete the project with and show certain savings. So some of those things can be challenging. So it will be a good place to talk to the students about some of those opportunities and challenges, and how a smart decision would be very beneficial for the person to decide in the long run. Another challenge they can see is the comparability of the codes and regulations, because different jurisdictions may have different codes, different regulations. So we can talk to the students the basic principle behind those codes, like if there is a code addressing certain topics, so what's the focus of those codes, what exactly they are trying to achieve, so that if the person is working in different jurisdictions, they know what to expect and how to address those. And another challenge always is the knowledge and skill gaps, like how do the tradespeople, or how do the students, or how do the professionals can keep themselves updated with the ever-changing needs in the market, and continuous new streams of new products which are flooding the market every day. The opportunities, we can talk about how it's going to reduce the cost, how it's going to reduce the cost in the long run, how it's going to reduce the maintenance needs, how it's going to help us improve the overall environment performance, and how it's also adding to the intangible benefits or intangible value, or say a social recognition, or in terms of the branding for the company, or branding for the jobs which they are doing. Right, so coming back to the same question again, so any feedback now, or what do you think could be some of those activities that could be integrated on this module? All right. Okay. Again, I just took the liberty of suggesting an example here. So this is just an indicative list. You can consider more activities here. So one of the group activity that we suggested could be divide the participants in a number of groups, and each group can host a group discussion on challenges and opportunities of incorporating sustainability into the construction and building industry. They can talk in terms of the sourcing of material, they can talk in terms of the knowledge gaps, they can talk into, because sometimes a new skill is required if you want to bring in new technology, new material, or new resources. So that could be one good brainstorming session. Yes, please.
I see Lauren has something to
Yeah, I noticed that. Lauren.
Yeah, just a question sparked by the group activity idea. And this is a question for the CICAN folks. Is the intention that we're creating a course that can be completed asynchronously by faculty on their own? Or
yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do want the course materials available in this online access or open educational resource, so that it can be accessed by faculty at any time they wish to update their skills. It would be great, from talking to tradespeople, and I'm sure many of you could relate, it would be great if some of those materials were just sort of copy and paste into the curriculum.
Totally,
Not all of
yeah.
it will, because there won't be that level of detail probably that they'll need specific to their locale, and specifically to what they're doing. But yeah, but I mean, maybe group discussion or group activities could be something that gets incorporated into the instructors content then.
I also just wanted to add, I expect that the Yogi, the first, what you described at the beginning, the more generic, what is climate change? What are GHGs? How are they produced? That kind of stuff should be usable by any instructor, because you want to make it use the language that resonates with the people that work in your trade. So like, I'm sure that if Matthew were to talk about that in his class, he would probably use different words than what you know, a geography professor might use, or a philosophy professor might use, right? Like, we all use our own terminology and our own examples. So when you shared that example about the copper mine, I think that's like, that really would resonate with your target audience. So making sure that you develop that initial information that levels everybody up, as you said, Yogi, not to assume that everybody knows even what a GHG is. I'm sure that lots of people aren't really necessarily sure what it is or how that's created. But if you give an example that's coming from carpentry, rather than an example that would resonate with a culinary student, or an example that would resonate with, you know, a household owner and their personal vehicle, right? You want to use those examples. Hopefully all of those will be content that asynchronously will be available, and people can just go, oh, wow, I can just take this and it tells me this should take me a half an hour, or it tells me this should take me an hour. And I know, oh, I can just take it and put it into my teaching schedule. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, great point, Judy. In fact, yeah, so we want to keep it generic, and we want to keep it more as, I would say, awareness session, so that it creates that logical thinking, what it is, how it is created, how we can adopt certain practices which will help us in minimizing or mitigating those impacts. And some of these modules could be relevant for any courses, irrespective of, let's say we are talking about 4 trades under this project, but these topics could be integrated for any other future courses as well, if you are wanting to expand it. So, and then what we can do is, after some of these initial basic modules, there could be 1 or 2 modules which is very specific to these 4 trades. So let's say then we can have some exercises and activities related to HVAC or horticulture or landscaping activities. That, okay, if we are only talking about landscaping, so let's design certain activities and research projects which the students can do for identifying, minimizing, or mitigating GHG or CO2 reductions from the landscaping activities. So the initial modules could be generic, but they start building up on each other, one after another. And that's why I suggested that instead of putting each one of these in one course, rather we spread it over under different courses, so that as the students gain more knowledge and expertise on their trade, they start looking their trade from climate change perspective. So if there are courses which is talking about material sourcing, then we can introduce the topics like how material sourcing can be a responsible material sourcing, which could minimize these GHG or CO2 emissions from the overall practices. So yeah, so that's how we are envisioning. But of course, like, as you are the course designers, please feel free to adapt it the way it works for you. Great. So, and one of the activities which I suggested here was like exploring the potential barriers to adoption, because as I said, many times there are technologies existing, but they might not work in a particular case. For example, many of these things, many new technologies could not be used for retrofitting because the older houses and older buildings were not designed for those changes. I saw a note. Did somebody want to jump in quickly? No. Okay. All right, same way, like similar to the last time, we can have a quick assessment here if required. Otherwise, we can just close that module there. And then I strongly recommend having a module on sustainable development goals. And under this module, we can certainly talk about focus on SDGs, but we can also talk about some other international treaties, good practices, guidelines, or if there are any other codes that could be relevant. And if you really look at most of these guidelines, treaties, or codes, they have the same purpose, and essentially each one of them are addressing more or less similar topics. So I will focus more on the principles, like what these guidelines or international treaties talk about and how our trade-related activities or construction sector could be associated with some of the goals that have been talked about in those guidelines or standards. And then I will talk about some of those activities which the people can, or tradespeople or professionals can think about when they are thinking of our obligations under those treaties. So I'll focus on understanding the SDGs because Canada is very big and very much committed to SDGs. We have a number of programs focused on SDG outcomes. So I won't be surprised in the coming days if we start seeing certain SDG related indicators in the construction sector. And then we'll talk about what could be some of the basics of applying SDGs in the practices and how SDGs could be integrated on day-to-day jobs. And after the completion of this module, the students should have a fair understanding of SDGs. Now, all 17 goals might not be relevant to the construction sector, might not be relevant to the specific tradespeople, but it will certainly help them understand that what are Canada's obligations and how some of the activities that we do under construction industry can impact our or Canada's commitment on SDGs. And then they should be able to explain the role of construction sector in achieving the SDGs or targets that we have set for ourselves. Increasingly, I am also seeing a number of businesses in their sustainability reporting. They are tracking the SDG performance, like their performance on SDG indicators, and they are publishing through their sustainability reports or ESG reports. I have come across many construction industries, like the multinational construction industries operating in different countries. They are also publishing their sustainability reports, and they have focused on two aspects. One on the climate change, like how much GHG reduction they have achieved, either through material substitution or the improved environmental practices, or what has been their performance on various SDG indicators. So if some of the tradespeople, let's say they are working with those big companies, they already will have certain targets to demonstrate that how their activities have been able to meet companies' overall goals and objectives. Now, this is some very basic introduction about the SDG. What is Agenda 2030? It's adopted by United Nations, all countries and all stakeholders acting in collaborative partnerships. And this has a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity, 17 goals, and 169 targets covered by those 17 goals. So perhaps I will provide, as an instructor, I may just go on specific goals. So some of the thematic issues are listed here, which I will talk in the next slide here. Now, I have identified specific SDG goals where some of those targets are listed, which could be relevant to construction sector. So you can either focus on all of these in detail, how they are relevant and what are some of those indicators, or you may pick and choose if you are talking about specific trades. But it's always a good idea to talk about all 17 goals and then go on those specific goals, which could be related to building and construction, and then pick up some examples, what those indicators are, and how a tradesperson's performance can relate to some of those specific targets. I would rather also introduce this as one of the activities for the students, because considering how important it is now, I'm pretty sure in next coming years, different businesses will start keeping certain SDG targets and start disclosing them. SDG 13 is very much related to climate action, which talks about the greenhouse gas reductions. And then like SDG 15, which is talking about the biodiversity. So you can see how they are very much related to various construction activities and how some of those examples could be tied up. Talks about the SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. We are talking about creating new jobs and boosting the economy. I was referring to one of the United Nations report, and it says every $1 million invested in retrofitting activity or construction or manufacturing of a new technology or environmentally safe technology is going to generate between 9 to 30 jobs. So that's the kind of parallel they have drawn here. And that very much relates to SDG 8, where we are talking about the economic growth. So this could be a very good and very interesting module, which can give a different flavor and bring in more of those sense of pride in the workers, like how our activities are related with some of those very important and key global regulations and guidelines. Right, and then we can also talk about how SDGs could be integrated in those construction projects. So tools like SDG Compass, how it can help construction sector to maximize the contributions to SDG. So things like understanding the SDGs, defining the priorities, setting goals, integrating those goals into the various activities, and then most important, reporting and communication. And as I said, there are many construction companies who are reporting on SDG performance. And I can provide reference to one of the resources which the instructors can go and download. So they can go to www.corporateregister.com. So that's a website where there is, they will have, I think, more than 40,000 sustainability reports. So most of the sustainability reports published globally, they are compiled on this website. So just go there, pick up the name of some of those big construction companies, download their sustainability reports, and see how some of those materiality analysis has been done, how they have identified some of those material issues, and how they have addressed some of those material issues, including GHG reduction or their performance on SDGs. So that
Could you repeat the website, Yogi? What was the website?
That's corporateregister.com.
Corporateregister.com?
That's right, yeah.
I want to look it up, thank you.
Yeah, so that's a website that compiles all sustainability reports that are published globally. And you can simply download those reports from there. If you know the name of the company, or you can choose just by sector itself. So that would be a fantastic resource to see how some of those big construction companies have identified certain issues, and then how they have responded to them, and what has been their overall performance on those chosen indicators. So yeah, that's the one. So as a free member, you can download certain resources. And like I was banned from this website because I had downloaded so much material and they wanted me to buy a paid membership, which I didn't. So yeah, but some of my other colleagues have been helping me in downloading some material. So it's a very good resource. You can also look at GRI guidelines. Like Global Reporting Initiative. So there is also a sustainability standard that you can download, which in general talks about the risk assessment process, and it talks about some of those sustainability indicators. I'm not sure yet if they have come out with a sector supplement for construction sector, but they have specific standards and guidelines for various other sectors as well. All right, so one thing which I would always recommend here, so when we are talking about SDGs, or when we are talking about the risk identification and risk mitigation, so talk to the students or teach them in identifying what is material in the sense what is significant or what is could be a risk for the sector, for the business, for the enterprise, and how to address them. And again, this is sometimes very much specific based on the sector. It could also be very specific based on where your projects are related. So I would suggest maybe keeping this a bit generic from the knowledge perspective, and then narrowing it down and using some construction specific examples, and perhaps sharing examples from some of those globally listed companies. Towards the end, I will share an example from a Hong Kong based company which is listed in Hong Kong, but they construct and manage properties throughout Hong Kong and in mainland China, which is one of the leaders in that region on sustainable construction practices. And there are plenty, there are many more. So we can provide the resources to the students and they can do it on their own time. All right. So yes, Nate.
Yeah, I think I just want to respond to what Judy was saying, is in referencing the interconnectivity of the work you guys are doing and the work we're part of. They're intrinsically connected and they're not separate at all. They're very much part of the same, what do you call it? The spirit is interconnected through it all. And I think the idea of project-based learning is going to come up as a major piece of our recommendations because it allows that the ability to find and measure things that are quantifiable, but at the same time understand the impacts and the value of things that aren't necessarily quantifiable, and then merging those together. And that becomes, as you guys have already pointed out, that a house or a home on the land, it doesn't get more connective than that. And that really is the root of all of our construction. And if we can start there, if we can start to really empower and give the trades the resources they need to understand that, then they become actively part of that ecosystem. So yeah. It's amazing. I'm very much looking forward to it. And thank you very much, Yogi, for the presentation.
Great. No, thank you, Nate. And I must say before we close today's session, in last 2 days and last 2 sessions from Gray and Ivy, I've learned so much. We run our indigenous training programs, which is like we call BEAR, Building Environmental Aboriginal Human Resources. But there were so many new learnings for me, despite like we running that program since 2006. I could see there are so many good practices, so many good things that we can learn and we can adapt in our existing programs. So thank you, Nate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's bang on. And that's part of our objective, is to be able to bring this everywhere. So it's not, this isn't about holding it close, and it's about finding those who can bring it to whoever.
Yeah. Doris.
Yes, thank you very much, Yogi. This was a wonderful presentation. I learned an awful lot. This question was actually more for CICAN in terms of the modules that we're developing. So they're going to be asynchronous. There won't be an instructor present. So are we including any form of assessments then?
Yes, I think so. I think you could include, obviously it's up to you. So really the big message, Doris, is you're all the experts. And so we really aren't going to prescribe all of those details, but we think that assessment is a core part. I think, as Yogi was saying too, that some form of assessment is not only for your peer instructors who will be using this material, and they can use it as a self-assessment really of what they've learned, but then importantly that when if they decide they want to use some of this material in their courses, you've already developed something that they could either wholesale adopt or adapt. It's always easier to start with something someone's created. So we would love if you could include some form of assessment, but at the same time, we leave it up to your teams to decide what's of value.
Okay, excellent. That's just what I was looking for. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Doris. Yeah, so I'll just do a last slide for today because, and I think we are just halfway through, so we'll have to do another session sometime when everybody is available. And honestly, I didn't want to drag it too long, but I thought rushing through it will not provide the real value. So yeah. So again, here I suggested some group activities, and of course you can consider how you want to bring that. So the students can develop an action plan for incorporating SDGs into construction and building industry. They can talk about identifying specific steps that individuals and organizations can take to reduce their carbon footprint, and then maybe mapping them against some of those targets or indicators from the SDGs itself. So there can be different ways, and I find this topic very interesting, and this topic like SDGs very interesting. And if there are some students who might be doing jobs abroad, I think they can also bring a lot of value because some of those SDG indicators can go beyond one SDG goal to several other goals in different countries. So yeah, so these first 3 modules could be very specific to basic and generic topics which can fit into any trade or any construction related courses. And then the remaining next 2 or 3 topics that we'll talk in the next session, they will go further focused on very specific to the individual trades and how they can be considered while designing those courses. Right.
So Yogi, you mean that in the remaining slides, you will cover things like, you know, how does it work for HVAC or for carpentry, etc.
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. So the next one would be climate change and construction trades. So I wanted to talk about specific trades in the remaining slides.
Yeah.
And again, we haven't gone been too prescriptive because we know, like as a tradesperson, things might be changing and things might be evolving every day, new technologies and new things. So we want to bring in that say perspective into the courses. Like the students should be able to learn about the concept and what to look for, rather than we give them one solution and that solution might be obsolete maybe 5 years from now. So we are trying to provide the resources and the content rather than a prescriptive solution here.
Okay,
Great,
so Yogi, thank you.
Yeah.
So is that it for today then?
Yeah, it's for today, and I think we are just halfway through, so perhaps we'll need another session of about an hour or something to finish it.
Yeah, for sure, Yogi. We will do that. We hope everybody's getting a lot of value out of this. I know that I'm certainly learning a lot, and thank you for the comments and questions that people have shared, both to Yogi, but also to CI Can. We're here to answer all of your questions. And next week, we have another really amazing treat for you. We have our regular once a month meeting of all of us together next week. And we've invited the Dean of Trades and Technology from Medicine Hat College, who is an expert in developing open educational resources, specifically in the trades. So that's been the work that he's done, and he's published quite a number on his own and in collaboration with peers, open educational resources specifically in the trades that he's going to show you a little bit and talk for just one part of the meeting, about half of the meeting, where Chad Flynn, who some of you may have come across in your careers, I know he's worked in BC as well as in Alberta and maybe elsewhere. So Inti will make sure that the invitation, Sandra can double check that everybody has the calendar invite for the meeting next week, but it's going to be, I think, another exceptionally interesting overview of what is entailed in creating such a resource, which will answer some of the questions you're asking about this whole synchronous, asynchronous, should there be assessments in there or not? Who is the student? Who is the ultimate user of your of the modules you're going to create? So Chad will go through all of that with you, and from the perspective of your industry, if you will, the trades industry next week. And in between all of these meetings, we hope that you've been able to connect with your module partner or partners to begin to brainstorm together. What are you going to do with this information that we're sharing with you? So next week, the other half of the meeting, we'll have an opportunity to talk more about how is it going? What can we do to help you more at CI Can to connect with each other? What additional resources do you need? Yogi's and Nate's emails are available to you, so you don't need to wait for further permission from us to email them. If you want to follow up with either of them about what you heard yesterday and today, now is the moment, and any other time. You don't have to wait. They're both ready to respond to your questions. I think no question is inappropriate or silly. Every question is welcome, so please email them if you have questions that are related to the content. But if you want to know more, like Doris's question about, what do we need to include, feel free to reach out to Sandra and I, and we'll be available as well. Yes, could Nate and Yogi just put your emails in the chat right now as well? Since everybody is together, then everybody can go grab it immediately. So we will gather together next week. We'll double check that everybody has that invitation in their calendar. If you've run into, all of the colleges have signed their contracts except for a college that's not here today. So we're following up with them. Yes, Louis or Lewis, can you go ahead?
I just had a generalized question for CICAN, just in regards to if you've been in contact with the individual training authorities that are pretty much the sources of our curriculum and how it's laid out, and how we would integrate some time management into incorporating this into our lessons for the students in each individual respective trade.
Wow, that's a big question, a great question. And the way I'm going to answer that question is, you are not being asked to develop curriculum for students. And that's something that our funder, because we're federally funded and your trades are regulated through Red Seal and through your provinces, and educational curriculum is decided by provinces and territories. So what we're doing here is we're asking you to create material for other instructors. And then we don't know, maybe as the project still has 3 years to go. So maybe once you've developed this material with the idea that it's going to be shared with other instructors, so other HVAC instructors, other carpentry or electrical instructors and landscape instructors, if the general consensus amongst all of you is that we need to go further in terms of what falls within the purview of your provincial regulators and with respect to Red Seal and the trades and how they're managed, that's a whole different conversation that we are ready to talk to you about, but not in the first instance. In the first instance, the reminder that these modules are being developed for other instructors. It's like a professional development opportunity for your fellow instructors. And if they choose to put some of this into their courses, great. And maybe we can see how that goes. And maybe there could be a community of practice developed where many of you try to integrate it into your courses and find challenges, find ways around those challenges, or you could join us in advocating for some changes to make space in your curriculum, because we understand that you already have very strict guidelines about what you need to teach and how much time you need to spend and everything. But I think I'll go back to what Yogi, and I'm sure Sean and Nate agree, to the extent that you can sprinkle things throughout, adding little bits. It's not about adding a couple of hours or a whole additional credit. It's about, can you, by changing the language that you use and the activities and exercises that you assign, can you integrate some of this stuff into your courses without interfering with what you already have to develop? But I'm not an instructor, so I really am going to leave that to all of you experts. And we might even have a whole conversation about that at one point, where you guys can talk about your challenges. Yes, Nate.
I was just going to say, Judy, the conversation that the month long with the medicine hat person, whoever that is.
Yeah, Chad.
Chad, yeah, just that idea of thinking about where these conversations happen is an important one. So integration into each course and pieces is really amazing. There's also the idea of bringing the energy of design and the energy of creating sustainable things to the beginning of the process for all trades, so that they do understand the holistic nature of the project prior to getting into the specifics of each trade. We don't know what that looks like. Obviously, Gray and Ivy has a belief in that as a concept, but that understanding of a holistic ecosystem will help everyone sort of understand as you go through the process.
Well, I feel like, and I can see Matthew's already, his mind is working. I think we need to integrate, maybe having some of the deans that are involved here will be able to speak to some of that. These are systemic issues. How do you add different courses? How do you mandate that there's a general education course about sustainability when tradespeople first start out, or within, like that's another question. But yes, I think that with Chad next week, we can have an opportunity to unpack that a little bit more. No, it's a good point, and it's a great question that you brought up there, Lewis. So don't worry, we take it into consideration. I'm sure lots of people have thoughts about this, and we're just going to have to make time and space to talk about it. Did you want to add anything more?
No, that was just my generalized question because like I said, in my mind, I was probably taking too much of a long-term outlook on it. I imagine the end result of this is integrating it into our trades courses and trying to provide a mindset for the future people getting into the trades to try to follow and be good stewards of our environment and respecting other people's cultures and whatnot. So I imagine I was just looking a little too far ahead, I think, in the terms of where the project is. So that answers everything I had to. Yeah,
that's so awesome. And thank you. That's a great note to end on. The fact that you're looking so far into the future is so important because I think the mess that we're in now is because as human beings, we haven't looked far enough into the future. And I think, again, with the wisdom of the 7 generations brought to us by Indigenous wisdom, we really do need to think about that long-term future. So great that you're already doing that. And I can sense that this group might end up pushing things quite far down the road, which is great. But we're going to start with the first chunk of activity. And we thank you all for spending another hour and a half with us. Thank you so much, Yogi, for all the effort and work that went into that amazing half of an amazing presentation. I know it's going to be great. The other half's going to be even more interesting because it'll get even more specific. So next week, we'll talk with everybody about how do we schedule that in. So let's just see each other next week at the general meeting. We'll spend some time with Chad Flynn talking about open educational resources, and then we'll spend the rest of the time on these nuts and bolts issues, including scheduling a part 2 with Yogi and eventually other interactions with Nate and Sean. Yeah. So we'll talk about all of that next week.
Thank you, Judy. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Meanwhile, emails to all of us are all welcome.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us, Harvey.
Wait.
Nice background.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Yogi.